We're gonna get started. We're not gonna punish the punctual people because of the others. And so thank you all for joining today. We're very excited to talk about post-traumatic growth. Usually our webinars are not always the most upbeat topics. For some reason, we decided to work on trauma, and it's not always inspirational, but I think the topic of post-traumatic growth is really exciting. I'm Gila Touloub. I'm the executive director of ICAR Collective, and today we are joined by two experts who are also amazing human beings. The first one is Dr. Edith Shiro, clinical psychologist based in Miami, specialized in trauma and post-traumatic growth and resilience. She is the author of a book called The Unexpected Gift of Trauma. And she works with people and communities and collectives to transform trauma into purpose. We also have Professor Eyal Fruchter with us, leading psychiatrist and researcher in Israel. He's specialized in PTSD and also has a big interest in post-traumatic growth. He was previously leading mental health in the Israeli Medical Corps and was the CEO of the Ma'ale Carmel Hospital in the north. And today I'm lucky to consider him a friend and a colleague as he heads medical and scientific affairs for ICAR Collective. So we're going to start with a presentation by Dr. Shiro, and then we'll have a moderated discussion with both Dr. Shiro and Professor Fruchter, and we hope that you'll participate also with your own questions. So let's begin. Edith, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This is so wonderful. I love seeing people's faces. So if you want to leave the camera on, because for me, it's always a dialogue and a conversation. And really, this is part of what I truly believe in, is this connection that happens. I mean, not just online, but also in person. So we'll talk more about that. And as Gila said, usually when we talk about trauma, when we talk about very difficult situations, it can be hard sometimes and it can be heavy. And my intention today is to bring a lot of hope, a lot of light, and a lot of possibility to see other perspectives and other ways of looking at the situations that we're in. So, join me in this journey. And I know we have 15 minutes, but Gila, please keep me please on top. And feel free, for me, it's okay if you want to interrupt, if you want to write a comment on the side, and I'll write and I'll respond. So very open and free. So let me share this with you. And I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm based right now in Miami. I'm originally from Venezuela. My family is Israeli, Syrian, and all kinds of things that I will tell you in a minute. And part of what I've been super interested in this topic of post-traumatic growth comes not just, this is the largest waterfall in Venezuela. It's called the Angel Fall. That's where I was born. And I've lived most of my life in New York. And I say that because as an immigrant and as a Jewish psychologist in New York for 20 years, I experienced all kinds of micro-traumatic situations, but I also work with refugees from Cambodia, Holocaust survivors, immigrants from Africa, from South America. And I also was at the right moment, the right time during 9/11, when we all had to run for our lives. And I was called by the Red Cross at that time as an expert in trauma to treat the survivors. And that was a busy time, and it was a very particular time. And I learned a lot about collective trauma then. And since then, I've worked a lot with collective trauma in different kinds. For example, here in Miami, there was a collapse of the building. The Surfside collapse was another example of collective trauma that reminded me a little bit of 9/11. Actually, some people from the 9/11 community came to Miami to give some support. And then there was many other, collective experiences. And of course, in Israel, as we all know, the concept of collective trauma is, alive and kicking. These are my grandparents, Auschwitz survivors, and I bring this up because I learned a lot from them in so many ways. And my other grandparents are Syrian refugees also, that they had to walk from Aleppo all the way to Israel somehow, and raise their children there. So I wanna bring up this definition of trauma. Trauma has become a very fashionable word these days. When I was doing my research and my work more than 25 years ago, and I would talk about trauma and post-traumatic growth, people thought I was talking in Chinese. And thank God now everybody knows what trauma is. But I want to open the definition of trauma. And as you know, there are big T traumas and small T traumas. And that means that big T traumas can be a war, right? It can be the loss of a loved one. It can be earthquake. And a small T trauma can be bullying. It can be not being invited to your best friend's wedding or, birthday party. It can be rejection, microaggressions, and many different experiences. But more than defining that is three basic things that I want to say about trauma. I'm very much not just a clinical psychologist from a perspective of the individual, but I really incorporate the systemic and the collective and the connected way of looking at things and looking at working with people and working with trauma. So when we talk about trauma, it's not just what happened to the person, but it's how do you yourself define what is trauma for yourself. So if I tell you, for example, I was in Israel during the war in Iran. I was giving a talk in a conference, and I happened to be in Jerusalem, and that's when it happened. Some people might say, well, Edith, you were at the Waldorf Astoria where you were giving a conference. This is not so traumatic. And some other people would say, wow, you had to run to the refuge, to the miklat, to the mamad every day. I mean, that was the most traumatic thing that ever happened to you, And some people said that to me, and some other people said, like, oh, it was nothing. Who defines that? Who decides what is traumatic and not traumatic? And that I ask that to you as well, and for us to think about this together. Because trauma is a very subjective topic. When I decide that it's traumatic for me, that's what is my experience. It's the experience that I'm living. And it might not be the same for you. And I'm getting divorced, and it's an easy divorce, and I'm not traumatized by that. Nobody else can come and say, oh, Edith, because you're divorced, that means that you're traumatized. No, not necessarily like that, right? Another thing about trauma, and I work very much with this definition, and something for us to think about when we're thinking about our own personal experiences and our professional work, is trauma is relational. What does that mean? That it's not just that there is a war in the country or in the world, or that it's not just that somebody died. It's not just that you got divorced. It's how people are reacting to you. What is happening to the relationships around you when this event is going on? How are you dealing with the shame? And maybe with what happened, or with the pain, and maybe somebody else is not understanding what is happening to you, right? Because let's say as an Israeli, you're in Israel, and people can talk about what you're going through. But let's say you come to Miami is not a good example because it's full of Israelis and Jews. But let's say you go to Texas, right? And you say no because I'm from Israel. Oh, okay. No, but there is a war in Israel. Oh, well, so what? And part of that micro interaction can be traumatizing and can be difficult to say, wow, you're not understanding what I'm going through. You're not validating. This is a child that goes to school and is being bullied and comes home and says to his mom, nobody loves me. Nobody wants to sit with me in the lunchroom. They took my books and my backpack. And the mom is like, shtuyot. This is like children's problems. It's not just the bullying that they did, is that the mother is not really acknowledging and validating. So it's in the relationship that the trauma happens as well. But in the same way, I want to say that trauma is relational, but the healing of trauma, here I want to say this, the healing of trauma is relational as well. And that's something very important for us to recognize and to remember, because it's not just the individual in and of itself that is going to do everything that they can, because we're superheroes, all of us, and we're so independent that we're going to take care of ourselves alone. Is my belief is that in the relationship is when the cure happens. Is in the relationship where the healing happens. And the third thing I want to say about trauma is that trauma is contagious. Contagious means that if you had a difficult time, if you're mourning and you're going through grief and you go to work that day, and you have this face and you have this energy, people around you are going to be affected by your grieving, by your situation. If a family member is having a chronic illness, it's not just the illness of that family member, it's everyone in the family is being affected, is going through something. If I'm working right now with parents of Hayalim Bodedim, of lone soldiers from 7 different countries in Latin America. We meet every Wednesday at 8 at
מדבר
night.
מומי, מטב, לגבי החונכות לילדים. בסדר, מה שלומך?
אולי אפשר לשים מיוט? כן. So, we working with the parents of Hayalim Bodedim, and it's been an incredible journey for 2 years now, almost 2 years. We meet every Wednesday, without missing one day, because the parents are going through their own experience of trauma, even though they're so far away from Israel, even though they're so far away from their child who is at Batzava, but they are they're living this in a way that it's very real and very relevant. So it's contagious in that way, but it's also contagious in a different way, which is from a vertical line, which means whatever happened to our ancestors, to our lineage, and happens to our grandparents, and then to our parents, and then to us, and then we pass it on to our children, that's also contagious. That has to do with the intergenerational transmission of trauma. That has to do with whatever is happening right now in Israel. One of the things that is very painful for me is that we're going to deal with this not just for this generation, but for the next and the next after that, and even more. How do I know that? Because I've been working with the second and third generations of Holocaust survivors. And, not only I've been working, but I am one of these people that have carried in my DNA, in my information, in my experience, what it's like to be at war. I grew up in Venezuela, in a very wealthy and beautiful and protected and thriving Jewish community that no longer exists because Venezuela has become more of a communist country and has a dictatorship. So everybody had to flee. But I had the sense of what it was to be at war. I had the experience in my body of being persecuted, of having to run away, of being an outsider. And I experienced that not because I lived it, but because my grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and they would tell me stories, and I would have it in my DNA because my other grandparents, because my family went through that, and it's fascinating. Even in dreams, I have this kind of experiences. And I want you guys to see, this is not uncommon for us Jewish people to go through this. And really, as I'm talking about this, if you can start to think about what experiences do you have now that really are not from your lifetime in this moment, but that you've inherited. What have you inherited from your parents, grandparents, from your culture, from your upbringing, from that it's really even hard to explain with your own experiences, but it's there and it manifests in your everyday life. When I was in the Miklat, in the Mamad, during the Iran war, like last month, I was with 50 people that were part of the conference. There were supposed to be 150 or 200, but only 50 were able to get to Jerusalem. And when the sirens went off, it was the first time for me. And my reaction was, oh my God, I have to bring water. I have to get water. I have to get food. I have to get water. And I was in a place that had a lot of water and a lot of food. That wasn't an issue. But I started to recognize, and my friends around me also were like recognizing my reaction of like, this is coming from someplace else. This is not me, with my experience talking about what it's like to live in a war. Is I'm bringing something from my inheritance that is affecting, and it's dictating the way that I'm reacting in the moment. And it was fascinating to me. It's not the first time that happens, that I can identify also, and I work with it, and I use it also to recognize it in other people as well. So, my invitation is for you to see where in your life these things are manifesting. The good news, as you hopefully, who knows about the concept of epigenetics? I mean, I would love to see hands, but I can't see all of you, so you'll tell me later, or maybe you can text me. But the concept of epigenetics is amazing because it gives us the possibility of changing and transforming the expression of those genes. So having said all of that, I want to come to post-traumatic growth. Everybody knows about PTSD, right? Everybody knows what post-traumatic stress disorder is, and everybody knows, oh, these are symptoms and what happens and how people react and all the anxiety and depression and the reactions and triggers of post-traumatic stress. My invitation today is for us to see that there's something else besides PTSD, and it's PTG. And we as a nation, as a culture, as a people, as professionals, we need to know that this is a possibility, because we cannot just stay stuck in the PTSD concept. Not only that, I mean, when I was in Israel and I actually met Gilad that day, there was a group of Nova survivors that were meeting, that they meet every day at the ICAR, building center. And I was asking the leaders, what are they doing? They said, no, we meet every week. And I said, okay, but Nova survivors have a lot of support. And they said, no, we don't want that kind of support. We don't agree with having the label of PTSD. We're not that. I'm not, traumatized and diagnosed with traumatic stress disorder. I want to look at this from a different perspective. And I loved it. I love that there were other possibilities, that there were other options, that there was another opening to look at this differently, right? So what is post-traumatic growth? Post-traumatic growth is every positive consequence that happens after a traumatic experience. And positive consequences don't mean that we put on rose-colored glasses and we say, oh, it's wonderful, the war is great, having trauma is the best, yay, can I have more trauma? No, don't mean that at all. And this is not a bypass, for dealing with trauma at all. This is not a wishful thinking at all. Again, how do I know that? Because this is what I work with my patients every day. This is a model. This is a language. This is something that we can use. These are the 5 stages of post-traumatic growth. And more than really rigid stages, as you can see, is a spiral, is bringing a language into what already is happening in the healing process. It's identifying in what stage each of us are in the process of growing, in the process of healing, in the process of transforming and transcending what's happening to us, right? And I'm not gonna have time to go deep into everything, but we'll have time to also have conversations and discuss. But the first stage and the most difficult one is radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is this awareness stage in which at some point in your life, you have to stop and take a pause and say, wow, what's happening to me right now is I'm constantly into this loop of repetition of the same behavior over and over and over. What's happening to me right now is that I'm stuck and I can't get out of this stuckness. What's happening to me is that I keep using addictive behavior to drugs, to TikTok and Instagram, to food, to exercise, to sex, to pornography, and to shopping, right? Shopping every day online, and this kind of addictive behavior is not allowing me to really face and feel my true feelings. And getting to that place is very, very, very difficult. because we're masters and kings and queens of dissociation, disconnection, and avoiding everything that is difficult and painful, right? And sometimes we need to do that 100% because it helps us survive. So, avoiding and dissociating right now, let's say in Israel, please do. Please avoid, dissociate, disconnect, please do. Because right now it's not the time to be going to radical acceptance. We need to still survive before we get into this healing. And of course, not everybody's in the same place and the same stage and the same process. But when people ask me all the time, well, Edith, at what stage are we in the growth, in post-traumatic growth? And I said, I don't know, because in Israel right now, we're still in trauma. We're so much in trauma right now that I don't think we really can fully enter into this radical acceptance. We will, and that's why part of why I want to talk to you is because I want us to think and to know that this is a possibility, and I want us to know that this is a something that that we can do. And I know I'm running out of time, so let me do this quickly. The second stage is safety and protection, which is looking for help, reaching out and say, not only I know what's happening to me, but I need to do it in relationship with other. Of course, with a therapist, with a mentor, with a group, with a retreat, with a guru, with a family, with community. This third stage is new narratives, is how do we begin to build a different way of telling the story. We're not just the victims. We're not just, this is what happened to me and this is how I survive. This is who I'm becoming. This is who I want to be. These are the stories that I believe in. These are the beliefs that I'm going to build again. The ones that I know were destroyed. I thought I could trust the government. I no longer trust the government, but I do trust this other thing. I thought that this place was safe. It's not safe, but I do believe that, that there's another place that is safe for me that I can trust. So we start to build this together in relationships with others. And then we integrate all of this, right, into a story that encompasses their trauma, their difficulty, their shadow, but it also encompasses the new things. Is that we're having new identities that we're embracing, that we've been building, that we want us, that are gonna take us to the next level. And then we get to the fifth stage, which is wisdom and growth. And this is the transforming stage. What happens in this stage is that we turn pain into purpose. We not only bounce back, but we bounce forward. We are able to transform the crisis into opportunity. That means that we say, I have new priorities. Maybe, the priorities that I had before no longer work. I'm changing my priorities. I know that I have a newfound strength in me that I'm going to use. My relationships are more meaningful. Meaning, like, I don't waste time with things and relationships and problems that are not relevant. A lot of people find purpose and find really a way of understanding why they're doing what they're doing. It's a question of why more than the why, the what for. Not so much, oh, why this happened to me? Okay, what this happened for what? The Viktor Frankl kind of thing, like bringing meaning into what's happening. And also people become more spiritual. And when I say spiritual, I don't mean religious, okay? I mean a connection to know that you are part of a whole, that there's something bigger, that there's some kind of spirituality that can be manifested in nature, in meditation, in music and dancing and art, but it's extremely important, that it's a key aspect of this healing. There are many studies that I can tell you more if we have more time, that have shown that people have, even in their prefrontal cortex, have developed a thicker layer when people become more spiritual, and it's a protective factor against future trauma. And these are all things that, I'm telling you because this is how we bring hope, how we bring alternatives and new possibilities into what we're living as a collective trauma or as an individual trauma. And I'm open to really continuing the conversation. The wound is the place where the light enters you. And where are you on this PTG journey? You yourself, you as a community, you as a society. Where are we as a people, as a group, as a country? Where are we in these stages? And you know, there's a lot more in my book. I encourage you to buy it. Gila has it already, and you know, we can continue talking. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Thank you so much. This was a great first overview, and I'm sure people have a lot of questions like I do. And so feel free, everyone, to add questions in the chat. And I want to start with a question to Eyal, because Eyal, you've been listening to Edith and you're here in Israel. And I'm curious, from your clinical and experience research here in Israel, do you see PTG already happening or potential for it? What are your thoughts on the topic?
Hi, well, first of all, thank you very much, Edith, for the great opening. I think that although we are in the middle of fighting, and as said, we're not even close to starting to process what we've been through and to work with it and to change it and to build even a narrative, because even the narrative of fighting is now, you know, it's changing all the time. We can hear that from the reserve force people, first going without hesitation, now having some hesitations. We see that in houses, it was very clear why they should recruit. Now it's not that clear, and everybody is working on that. But we still can see a lot of places where post-traumatic growth is starting to emerge. First of all, if you look even in our field, you can see all the initiatives towards treating and taking care of PTSD as a sign of post-traumatic growth, because we're not ready to accept, or we're not willing to accept the fact that we'll have so many PTSD people suffering from PTSD and not functioning. And there are a lot of new initiatives, both technological and personal, that are emerging. And it's like the country is bubbling with ideas how to cope with it. Now, it's a very Israeli way of coping, but it is a growth, because prior to the war, there was almost no work on that field. So I can see that as something that is growing. I can see that the changes of the narrative are not going on the weak side. So there are the way we talk about the soldiers is looking at them as heroes, brave people that are doing. We're not putting the army and the military personnel in the war, in the political war, and in the ethical war. We give them full credit for what they're doing all the time, and you can see that, and that's a narrative of a country that can grow out of the traumatic events that are happening. Because if you listen just to the world, these soldiers are all murderers, my son also, okay? It's not that I'm not a part of that. They're all killers, molesting and torturing the poor Gazayan people. But it's not the narrative that is catching in Israel. So I think the narrative is also getting to the right way. Other fields, we don't see it yet. We don't see it yet in solutions or in clear solutions, or even in choosing. But I know some people that came out of war and decided to change their methods. We could see that in Yuval from the Nova Party, right? Saying, okay, I was sitting there in the garbage can. A lot of my friends are killed. I was near death. I heard my boyfriend getting killed. But I decided then that I'm not postponing yet anymore the singing career that I always thought of and always postponed. And she started, and we all know that she ended up in the Eurovision contest #2. So people are growing, but that's on the personal level. We don't see it so much.
I want to continue with this question, the narrative, maybe Edith. I mean, we know from research that event centrality plays a big role, like how much people define themselves based on the traumatic event they went through, right? So people who define themselves as Holocaust survivors, Nova survivors, right? Instead of, a mother, a sister, like how much it's part of your identity has a big influence on the way we can recover and grow from the traumatic event. How do we create a collective narrative? Especially you were talking about like Israel, like how do we create that? Have you seen communities do that together or?
Yes. I love that question. And identity is such a central topic and related to what Eyal is saying as well. You know, if you are a soldier and what you come out with is that you're a murderer and you're, you know, killing people, there's this something called moral injuries of war. Eyal, I'm sure you've heard about that, right? And imagine carrying that moral injury that defines your identity. How do you get out of that?
Just to let you know, Edith, the army just released a paper where they renamed moral injury identity crisis.
Oh, I love that.
Goes very well with what you're saying.
Exactly. So, and they what was the argument of why they renamed it? Because they didn't want to call it an injury?
I think it was also about the moral part, because, you know, I mean, Eyal can say more, but I also think that, you know, it's not only about moral, because even if you think morally you're doing the right thing, you also have an injury to your identity.
Yeah, but it's more the morality part is to say, well, I'm here defending my country, and at the same time, I don't believe in war.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, that's the morality. It's like, what do I do? Do I go defend my country? Do I become the soldier that everybody wants me to be and that I also believe in? And at the same time, I don't want to kill people, or I don't want to fight, or I don't believe that war is the solution. It's a very difficult thing. And yes, it's part of the identity. And part of what helps with this, you know, you see how when I'm expanding the concept of trauma, it's not individual, it's collective. So when we look at one soldier that is going through this, it's extremely traumatic. But when we as a collective are saying we all are supporting the soldiers that are going through this identity crisis, it becomes something else. An example, I want to tell you an example of how we collectively do with identity. When the building collapsed here in Miami, it was 100 people that died about, but there were people from all over the world. I don't know how this international building touched so many communities, but it also touched the Jewish community a lot. And I had personal friends that their kids died, and had personal friends that their parents died. And naturally, people began to gather every day at 8 in the morning and at 6 in the evening, every day for a whole month, to talk about what happened, to wait for the results of finding bodies, which was really difficult, this ambiguity of loss. That you didn't know, that's another concept, ambiguous loss. Like, are they dead? Are they not dead? Are they here? Are they not here? And as a collective, you know, the person is missing physically, but it's present emotionally, right? That's called ambiguous loss. It's the hardest part of loss that we have. The identity, am I a widow, or am I somebody that has a husband? Am I a parent that has a child dead, or that my child is alive and is going to come out of the rubbles? You know, these are identity crises that are happening. And as a community, people were sitting together every day for a month, twice a day, to check on each other, to exchange resources, to talk about who they were, to talk about what they were going to do, you know, and that kind of thing that happened organically. And then eventually I continued this group for 2 years, actually, to continue the gathering and the grouping. It's like we have a new identity. We are the strong families. We are the families that have gone through such difficulty, and we know things that other people don't know. And we understand things that other people don't understand. And believe it or not, this kind of thing helped them a lot. In some way, they said, well, nobody can understand what I went through because I lost my husband, or I lost my child, or I lost both my parents at the same time in the building, or 3 brothers and sisters because they were all in the building and they all died. But within the group, within the collective, they were so understood and so held and so connected that they formed a new identity there. And they had a new story to tell. They had a new language to use. And sometimes it was like They were making fun of, that people would come and say, oh, poor you, that you had this happen and that happened. And then they would come to the group and say, oh, can you believe that person said that? In reality, this is, that I want to call it this way. I want to use this language. It happens with the parents of lone soldiers that I work with. Some of the mothers tell me, can you believe that people are saying, ay, miskena, poor you, you have your child in the war in Gaza, must be so hard. And when she comes to the group and she shares with everybody, she says, they have no idea that I'm so proud of my child, and that every day I see him thriving and becoming this, man that he is, and and they miss that completely. But also the other way around. Some people, for example, with the parents of lone soldiers, say, oh my God, your son, he must be a gibor, it's a hero, wow. And then they come to the group every week and they say, these people have no idea that I'm crying every day. I haven't slept in 2 years because I'm Israeli time. So when it's daytime, it's nighttime, and when it's nighttime, it's daytime. Every alarm on the phone I'm reacting to. They're clueless about how I'm suffering, how I don't want my kid to be in the war, how I don't even agree that he went. He went by himself because he wanted, but I didn't want him to go. But I have to support him and I have to be there for him. And my understanding of family has changed completely. My identity as a family has changed completely. Now we are a family that has a child in the IDF, and that is a lone soldier. It changes the story of how you tell what you tell yourself and what you tell the other. And this is where this becomes very intentional, because what story you want to tell yourself? What is the story that you're using and that you're telling yourself and that you're telling others about what's happening? How are we telling a story as Israeli people, let's say, or as Jews? And I agree with Eyal that we're not there yet, because there's so many stories that keep changing over and over. That's why opening spaces for us to talk like this, like we're doing now, for example, if we had more time, and I would love to hear, what is the story that you're telling? What is the story that you're telling about what's been happening in the last 2 years since October 7th? How do you tell this story? And what you want to keep and what do you want to let go of? And how you're telling the story to your children, your grandchildren, or to your family? How is that making us more relevant or more resilient or stronger? No?
Yeah. We have a question from Murray, who's asking, I guess, are you asking what is the biological link to PTG, or do you want to explain your question?
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was one question, but that was minor compared to the ideas that you're stimulating. And Edith, do you have any suggestions about specific strategies, interventions for the society, for the culture, so that it will grow? Because, it's a crisis, and apparently the Hebrew word for crisis is very interesting derivation-wise in terms of new growth. So any specific recommendations for the culture, for the society?
Yeah, yes. Thank you so much, Marie, for that question, because we tend to think in a very individualistic way. Even the healing professions, medicine and psychology, think very individualistic and very linear. And my proposal is for us to think more collective and more systemic. And what does that mean? That we open physical spaces for us to have conversation, that we maybe as a society in Israel, I don't, Mura, you live in California, right?
Yeah.
You're in California, but let's say even in California, but let's say in Israel, but that can happen in California too, that, the invitation to open for community conversations, to say, where are you at? What's happening? During 9/11, for example, a lot of that happened in Tribeca and downtown New York, and places in which the schools or the communities would open up and say, how are you doing? What's going on? And really sharing open space, just to do 3 things at the beginning. And it's called VAR, validation, acknowledgement, and recognition. Because we need to begin with that, to validate what you're feeling and what's happening with you, to acknowledge that what you're going through is something significant and meaningful, that it's not being dismissed. that it's important, that it's relevant, and to recognize, right? The validation, acknowledgement, and recognition, to recognize that this is a thing that is happening. You know, there are people around that are saying nothing is happening. We're so resilient. You know, in Israel when I've been, and I hope this is not offensive, but it's like, oh, I'm so resilient. We're so resilient. Nothing is happening. We're in Tel Aviv having fun in the restaurants, and we're going and doing. We're going to go through this. We've been at war our whole lives. Israel people for 5,000 years. We know what it's like. Yes, that's true. And also, there's a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and a lot of hurt. And that recognizing that in a collective setting is the first step that we need to do. Because yes, it's true that we're so resilient that we come up with all kinds of things. Like I'm right now in 3 different studies of, improving therapy for trauma. Like I'm one with retreats, another one with pods that you put everywhere in your body to monitor feedback. Another one, I'm supervising a clinic in Tel Aviv. So yes, all of that is wonderful and great. But if we don't give space to open for the real conversations about validating what's happening, in a collective way, not just you by yourself or in therapy with your therapist, but in the community, and say, how are we feeling? What happened to you? It's true that the kids were at war, and it's yes, we're having political issues, we're having social issues. How are we doing and yeah, it might not happen with the whole country. Maybe it will, and we can with technology, we can do that. But even in small communities, it's called islands of coherence. This is the term that we use. Islands of coherence. So it's islands in different parts of the country or different parts of the world that we start the conversations that are coherent, that are like truthful, that are real. And from then, there are many other steps. That we talk about a new narrative and how do we integrate and how we get to the growth.
When I'm looking at people, I'm talking usually something like you mentioned, Edith, which is the ABC, like in resuscitation. We talk about awareness is the A. We should be aware of what we're going through and not neglecting it. And then B is balance. We need to keep balance, not to get panicked, but not to get overwhelmed with ourselves. And not to be judgmental towards ourselves during that phase. And C is connectiveness. And it's very close to what you're saying. So we're coming from different worlds, but we use, same ideas. So it's
Definitely,
going all over.
definitely. Yeah. And that's part why this is so, I love that you're saying the ABC, because it's not that I'm telling you this is a model, that it's one way of thinking. It's more like bringing language into some things that are already happening. This process happens all the time. Yeah. In every way. Every time you see healing happening collectively or individually, it's these stages. It's just that so we can use it and say, oh, by the way, I'm in stage 3. I'm in the new narrative stage. Or, oh, by the way, I'm in like stage 1 when I'm just beginning to become aware of what the trauma is. Or I'm in stage 5 when I'm already have been into the purpose, like there are people that have overcome trauma, or groups of people or communities have overcome trauma, and they're already beginning to help other people and give other people and become in service for someone else. Even like, let's say the example of the parents that I work with that are with lone soldiers, after 2 years of dealing with their own issues and their own difficulties, some of the parents that no longer have the kids as a soldier have opened a center. I think this is beautiful, a center that it's a nonprofit center that to help other families with Hayalim Bodedim, with lone soldiers that didn't exist before, in Latin America. Let's say there's one in Mexico and there's one in Argentina right now, because of how they've healed themselves and how they've healed collectively, and now they want to give back to the community.
That's beautiful. So now if you want to look at the CNS physical structures, then when we talk about PTSD, we usually talk about the area of the amygdala, which is stuck with a bad memory. It's the area where memories and emotions get into the brain. and usually during the REM sleep, it should be processed and detached and put in two different areas in the cortical areas. Now, when the amygdala is stuck because it's overwhelmed, it's like the CPU is over 80, it's not able to process. So, and you can't, of course, turn it off. When this is, the amygdala is overworking, the area of the prefrontal cortex is working far less because they're interconnected by the net of the brain. The brain is a system that is all connected. And the area of the prefrontal cortex is the a managemental area. So it's choosing, the mapping, the planning, the start-stop area, the working memory area. And this is why in PTSD persons, you see that they have a lot of problems in choosing, a lot of problems with stopping. When they start getting overwhelmed, they would go all the way and even act violently because they cannot stop, because they're so, the prefrontal is working far less and they're not concentrated, and they don't remember too well what they have to do. So they tend to forget the kids in the kindergarten, or not to be able to choose among the choices of 4 different tomato sauce. So they will leave the chart and just go. In post-traumatic growth, as far as I'm familiar with that, we do not know what's growing yet, but I think that the main idea would be to stop fighting with a bad memory and start getting it as, okay, it's part of me, and I am still able to work my life. Okay, so if I would look where it's working, I would say that we are not curing the amygdala, but we are advancing the prefrontal area. Okay, we do not see it yet.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's getting out of the survival mode in the nervous system and getting into the thriving mode. It's not just stable, but thriving. And that means that the traumatic memory no longer is a trigger. So we can talk about the war or the loss or the grief or in a way that doesn't trigger the emotions in the body and that they have been released. The other part of it is that I mentioned there are amazing studies at Columbia University by Dr. Lisa Miller she has done a lot of MRIs into the brain of people that have overcome trauma and that have developed this more spiritual connectivity. And she's found a thicker layer of a part of the prefrontal cortex that really is associated physically with spirituality. I think that's fascinating. I tell this to everyone. She's a good colleague with my friends. She actually introduced my book here in the United States. And I think these are very, very concrete, specific findings, from a research perspective that only say we need to do more of this. We need to use this as protective factors for future trauma, so we don't fall into the PTSD reaction.
That's great.
What else? What else do you I want to hear other people also. What do they think? Did you stay with anything that is moving or relevant, or that you find that it's that you can identify with, or that you don't agree with?
Yeah, I'm curious about the systemic levels. Like what does because ICAR is looking at system changes, right? What do you think is the role of the health system? What do you think the government or the education system, what could they do to support, post-traumatic growth? Like, and are there barriers like that are cultural, policy, logistical? What can we?
Yeah, I love that. I think the first and foremost is to know that PTG exists. I think putting that as part of the consciousness, that post-traumatic growth is an option, is an alternative, is a possibility. I think it's very important, because it's not just about recovering from trauma. It's not just about, treating symptoms of trauma, but it's about saying, what can we do after such collective traumatic experiences that can take us to the next level? And this is something that it's a true option. But the second thing that I think is important is not to treat this as an individual way, but to really open for healing. I know it's happening now a lot. It's like, the retreats for soldiers that they go and they take them to, you've all heard of this, right? Like they go to where, Greece or Cyprus or something for retreats and then come back. But it's not just for the soldiers. I think there has to be open spaces for the society, for the community, to have open conversations about the wound, about the pain, about the difficulty, that it's not political. It's not necessarily a political conversation, because in Israel, it's, we're so used to talking politically, and I don't know, please disagree with me if you know the people, Elad, or, people that live in Dalia, people that live in Israel, Yael, I mean, but it's really talking about more of an emotional conversation of what is this doing to me and how is this affecting me, and how we can share in this experience and acknowledge that this is difficult. Not that we're not a strong country, or not that we're not resilient. Yes, we are, but that there's also space for talking about the wounds and talking about the pain, and to allow for maybe more organizations that are not just into the diagnosis and the labels. Oh, this person is PTSD, this person has psychosis. It's not so much about the mental health label, depression and anxiety, but it's more about opening for a conversation that doesn't need labels. That it's like, this is how I'm feeling right now. This is a feeling, this is an experience, and this is what's happening, without necessarily having to be labeled or diagnosed so strictly. I think that would help. I also think that, different hospitals should have programs that have to do with growth, and not just with treating the symptoms. But this is all over the world. Like, we do a lot of treating symptoms, and we don't do enough of dealing with identity, dealing with emotions, dealing with, how you want to change the way that the family dynamic, how are you want to be part of a society.
What I can tell is that the two big insurance companies that are relevant to the crisis that we face now, one is, of course, the handicap wing in rehabilitation in the Ministry of Defense, and the other is the National Insurance. Both of these bodies, prior to the war, were not really immersed in any way in rehabilitation. They were just looking on compensation and maybe slightly on treatment of PTSD after a traumatic event. The National Insurance is in charge of the פעולות איבה, Gila translated.
What is that?
Yeah, Tara.
But they now turned, and they are investing time in finding rehabilitation programs or options for the soldiers and for those civilians who suffered the horrors of the 7th of October and then the evacuation. And they are trying to look for different solutions, which are not just to compensate them for their losses and pain. So hopefully we will be in that direction.
But also, for example, in schools, like, how are we teaching children to talk about what's happening right now? And what are the resources that we're giving parents and teachers, for example, in how to deal with this? Because it's hard to be a teacher right now and have 5-year-olds or 7-year-olds that are coming up with stories or that are living certain experiences. And how are we supporting teachers or parents to deal with, like, little kids? And what's the narrative, the identity, right? All these questions that we're talking about. So I would say that having more holistic programs, collective protocols to say, this is how we all as a society can talk about this, or these are some of the questions that we can bring, these are some of the trainings that we can do for teachers, for parents, for mentors, to also bring into the into how we're educating our children into what to do with this and how to understand it. And I know, Murray, you had a question about how do we measure and validate the treatment? I mean, in my experience, everybody, the ones that I know, and Eyal can talk more about that, they're very rigorous measurements of how they're implementing it, and they're in trial periods right now. There are many different things that are being used that are new, that including psychedelics, including technological AI. There's a lot of treatments that are using artificial intelligence. So I think they're in the trial periods now with like rigorous scientific methods to see. And it's going to take a while, I think, until they really see what's really working or not. I would
think,
say. Yeah, I don't know.
Another thing that I would say on this, Murray, is actually you could have both PTSD and PTG at the same time, right? So you have people who the PTSD symptoms based on the DSM-5 don't change that much, right? But they are much more functional. They have better relationships. They go back to work. And that tells us that something is happening. And actually the Cohen Veterans Network in the US, for example, added some of those functional tests because they were seeing so many of their patients thriving in terms of their relationship with their children and spouses, and growing, but the symptoms of PTSD were still there. They were still having the nightmares, etc.
Yes, Gila, that's wonderful that you're bringing this up. The image that I showed you of the spiral, right? You can go through these stages of post-traumatic growth, let's say in the area of relationships, but not necessarily at work. Or maybe you can go through the growth and the healing in your relationship with yourself, or in with somebody in a professional setting, but not necessarily with your spouse, or not necessarily in with your friends, or or in your emotional and romantic life. So yes, you can be in post-traumatic growth in one area in your life and be very much into symptoms of trauma in the other. And that's why we have to it goes not a linear 5 stages, but it goes up and down and left and right. And I think it's super important to see that. Murray, I'm sorry you have to leave. Thank you so much for your participation. And I also wanted to say that part of these changes, it's that I forgot what I was going to say. but it had to do with, yes, that if we just stay in resilience, this is something I say in my book that it's a little controversial, and I'm curious to see what you're going to think. Murray, don't leave before I say this, that not always resilience is the best thing to get to growth. I know it sounds crazy what I'm saying right now, but if we're so much into the resilience and we're so strong in everything that we can do and there's solutions to everything, we don't get to the place in which we're a little bit broken and a little bit shattered and a little bit shaken, then that we can be open enough to new ways of seeing things, to new perspectives, to new narratives. We human beings can be very good at being comfortable, and yes, of course, we always want to find what's our comfort zone. So to get us out of that place, and when we're shaken in ways that we don't find so much the resources or the tools to deal with the situation, that's when we learn a lot. If we already have all the answers and we already have all the solutions, yes, we stay at this level of resilience and we're doing good. But it's in those moments when we don't know. It's in the moments of uncertainty. It's in the moments of a little bit of like, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this. Oh my God, this is something I've never seen before. I've never experienced before. And we allow ourselves to be in that place, for even if it's for a little bit, even if it's painful, that some of the big discoveries happen, and some of the bigger, newer resources will come. So part of what we can do as a country and maybe as a collective is say, let's acknowledge that we don't have all the answers, and let's be open to what's new that can happen, even if it means that we stay in the uncertainty for a little bit. It's a big ask. It's very difficult, and that's why I'm saying it's controversial, but that's what I've seen in my experience as well.
Thank you.
I have to just add that I just heard a podcast with Rachel Pollan describing Jacob's wrestling with whatever. And Jacob says, I'm not going to stop wrestling until I get a blessing. That's very much what you're saying. So thank you. Very profound.
Funny you say that, because that's the example I use for post-traumatic growth. That pasuk in the Torah is the example that I use for post-traumatic growth. So funny you mentioned that.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Edith and Eyal. Key takeaways for me, really, like post-traumatic growth is not about ignoring the suffering. I really love that you use radical acceptance. I also love that book. But it's about transitioning, right? And finding meaning, renewed identity, resilience. The narrative is really important, and we need to do that with safety and with community. We can't do that alone. And then I think, there is an opportunity now for organizations, funders, and public system to really think about post-traumatic growth. So for everyone, we'll upload the recording. I really, once again, encourage you to look into Edith's book, The Unexpected Gift of Trauma, and sign up to our newsletter if you didn't yet, so that you can know about all the future webinars. Thank you, Edith and Eyal. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Our webinars are not always the most upbeat topics for some reason. We decided to work on trauma, and it's not always inspirational, but I think the topic of post-traumatic growth is really exciting. I'm Gila Touloub. I'm the executive director of ICAR Collective, and today we are joined by two experts who are also amazing human beings. The first one is Dr. Edith Shiro, clinical psychologist based in Miami.